Get ready for the best holiday sale of the year. For a limited time, enjoy 50% off annual news subscriptions at inforum.news/gift. That's right, 50% off unlimited access to local news so you can stay informed and connected to your community. It's a gift you'll want to give yourself. This incredible holiday offer ends December 22nd, so don't miss out. Subscribe now at inforum.news/gift.
Welcome to Plain Talk. I should share before we get started with our first guest. I should share part of my personal resume. Before I worked for Forum Communications Company. I'm trying to think how long I've been working now. I don't even remember. 7-8 years now. I don't know. My, how the time flies. I worked for a nonprofit. A nonprofit journalism outfit. It was called watchdog.org. It's defunct now. But it was funded by a nonprofit group. The money came from somewhere. I didn't know where. Nobody told me. They employed me to write stories, and with one exception, they published pretty much everything I wrote. The one exception being they didn't really like political horse race stories, this candidate versus that candidate. They more wanted policy stories, so that sort of thing. They didn't want me writing for them anyway. I wrote those things for my blog at the time. But supposedly, I saw a lot of people saying that the group, it was definitely a right-of-center group. Definitely, I think they described themselves as being free market. There was talk that they were funded by the Koch brothers. I have no idea if that was true. Their donors were private, and nobody else knows if that was true or not. Maybe they were. I don't know. But I always took a lot of flack for working from them. People saying, oh, you guys are evil. I don't know. I mean, people like to shoot the messenger, I guess. Anyway, that's part of my resume, and I was proud of the work I did there. I worked with a lot of smart, great people, and I think for the most part, we did pretty good work. In that context, I want to talk. There is a new nonprofit journalism organization in North Dakota. It's called the North Dakota Monitor. You can find them at northdakotamonitor.com. The editor of this organization is Amy Dalrymple, formerly of the Bismarck Tribune, formerly of Forum Communications Company. And she's here to talk with Ben and I, Ben Hansen, of course, my co-host today, about the new outfit. Amy, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me, Rob.
Tell me about the North Dakota Monitor. How did it come to be?
Yeah, well, States Newsroom is a national nonprofit. I became first familiar with them within the past year because of South Dakota Searchlight, which is about a year old. But the network has been around for longer than that. We are now the 38th state to have a newsroom in our state, and the focus is to cover state government and policy issues and how they affect North Dakota citizens.
So you got tied into this national group trying to bring this in. What is going to differentiate you from the current media landscape in the state of North Dakota, both print, website, other, Rockport mainly?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think we just want to be another source. We're not going to replace any of the sources that are already out there, but we're going to be another source. And there might be times that we're covering meetings that perhaps other media can't get to. And we want to just try to have more eyes and ears covering state government.
I know you just started, but do you happen to have like an example off the top of your head you could give folks of something that hasn't been covered that you're trying to address?
Yeah, well, yesterday I was monitoring the PERS board, and I wasn't able to monitor it, 100% because it was our launch day. But I did record the meeting, and I tuned in when I could. One thing I'm going to be looking into is there is a request for the Ethics Commission to look at something related to the PERS board. And so I'm still doing the reporting on it, so I'm not really prepared to get into the details because I have more work to do. But that's just one example of something that caught my eye on an agenda, and I was going to look into it.
Amy, I was looking around, and one reason I wanted to mention my background working in nonprofit journalism is because, I mean, first of all, it exists, but I did want to talk about, because there's been some criticism nationally of the State Newsroom?
States Newsroom.
States Newsroom, that's right. I'm looking here from NewsGuard. they seem to have a pretty low. I don't know. I'm going to read. They had a back and forth with. It looks like a statement from they rated States Newsroom pretty lowly, and they said that I know your reporters are well credentialed and well meaning, but their journalism is not free. It has been bought by people with a political agenda. And then I was reading in the Washington Post, there was an article, and again, this is from somebody at NewsGuard. It's a NewsGuard, by the way, is a New York-based organization that reviews news sites to combat misinformation. One of their correspondents wrote this about NewsGuard. She said, and wrote about specifically one of your subsidiaries, the Courier in New York. She says the Courier does not earn revenue from ads or reveal its donors, but it has somehow spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on targeted Facebook ads to ensure that, say, Representative Harley Ruta's constituents in California see Courier Newsroom's flowery articles about his accomplishments. I'm sorry, that was a little bit out of context, but I mean, basically, they're saying that this is a progressive organization. It's backed by progressive money, and its intent is to back progressive causes. What do you say to criticism like that?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity to get into that, Rob. The editorial decisions that we're going to be making at the North Dakota Monitor are going to be made in North Dakota, and I'm leading that. I am not going to be answering to donors. I probably won't know who they are unless they send me an email to tell me that they donated. We do have disclosure on our website, and I'd encourage your listeners to check it out. If you go to statesnewsroom.com/support, any donor who has contributed $1,000 or more, or I might have the number wrong. Maybe it's.
I think it's $1,000. I was looking at it. I think it's $1,000.
Yep. Anyone that's contributed $1,000 or more is listed there, and there's also links to the 990 tax forms. So I think they're very transparent about who the donors are. That's probably the only way I'll even know who the donors are is if I dig into it myself. But I'm comfortable that I'm not going to be influenced by donors telling us what to report on, just like when I was Bismarck Tribune editor and companies like Summit Carbon Solutions were running full page ads that didn't affect our decision of how we covered that story.
Do you feel like the nonprofit model is better? I mean, because obviously, I think. I'm sorry, Ben. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you go.
Okay, well, I think part of the argument here is that nonprofit journalism is picking up where sort of for-profit journalism has led off, and I mean, there's no question. I mean, you work in the industry same as I do. It's been a struggle. It's hard to employ enough reporters to cover all the things that need to be covered. There's pressures from the internet and everything else. Do you feel like the nonprofit model is the solution to this? In what ways is it better than the for-profit model? In your mind?
Well, I don't know that it's better. I think it's great that it's an additional source because we're not seeing enough support, for the traditional media in terms of advertising revenue like there used to be. And so I think it's an additional source, and I think just having a variety of sources is really important. I'm sure hoping that it's the solution for the future. And I think everyone in the industry is still trying to figure out what is the model for sustainable news organizations. And so far, there's been a lot of community support just right here in North Dakota. I've been really gratified by the number of people who've reached out to me that are excited that we've launched, and some have said, hey, we signed up for $5 a month. Or so I think there is a lot of support, and I'm excited for the potential.
Are you planning anything specific around? I know we have our upcoming legislative session isn't until 2025, so that's not going to be there for a bit. Or are you going to have someone specifically covering state government versus? I saw one of your editors is formerly, I believe it was Jeff Beach, is formerly of Egg Week, which does some great coverage on, frankly, things that tend not to get grab headlines as much in the egg industry. Are you going to have people specific to individual beats like the agriculture industry, the energy industry, the state legislature, or is it going to be more generalist?
It's going to be a combination. I mean, I think we're all going to be generalists because it's just going to require us to kind of fill in where needed. But certainly Jeff has the agriculture expertise, and so he'll be covering those stories. And Michael Ochterling, who's going to be joining our team in January, he's really interested in covering the legislature, and so he'll definitely be probably taking a lead role on that. But I think it's going to take all four of us to cover the legislature. So I think we will kind of be generalists.
Do you feel one thing that sometimes kind of bothers me about the media is that, you know, I read a news story, and particularly when it goes national, it kind of seems like everybody reports the same things. And I don't know how it happens sometimes. Like, it just seems like a narrative forms very quickly. And a lot of times for someone who covers this stuff closely, I talk with the people, it's like, I don't understand why that's the narrative. Right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is a lot of times it seems like there's a lot of groupthink, or there's a lot of follow the leader, follow the pack. And that's something I've tried to avoid in my career. I kind of try to go my own way. Do you feel like that's important? Is that something North Dakota Monitor could offer is a different, you know, I don't want perspective? And I know that's a dirty word if somebody's trying to do, you know, straight journalism, that a perspective is a bad thing. But, you know, I don't know. You know, ultimately when you're writing a news article, you know, what's the headline and what photo you use and which quotes you put in the first paragraph and which you put in the eighth. I mean, these are all decisions that somebody's making. And I think sometimes it can be helpful to have a different perspective. Is that part of the goal here?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, Rob. You know, you do see kind of the same top stories, whether you're watching NBC Nightly News or you're watching, you know, other headlines, that there does seem to be sometimes certain stories do grab the headlines and others get ignored. And one of the things that I am excited about with this new network being part of North Dakota is that the story ideas are really being generated by the states. Rather than having all of our resources focused in DC or focused in New York, our resources are focused in the states. And so a great example of that was the story that we published yesterday about the agency that regulates pipelines. I got the opportunity for our launch to suggest a story to the States Newsroom national team, and I could pick any topic. And since I come from the energy beats, I've always been curious, like, how much resources does this agency PHMSA have to regulate pipelines in North Dakota and other states? And so the national reporter, Jacob Fischler, he did a great job looking into that issue and highlighting how under-resourced they are and how they don't have a head of that department 3 years into the Biden administration. And so I think that's an example of where this network might be able to produce some stories that perhaps wouldn't get told all the time because the national reporters might not be aware of what issues are really important to the states.
And I think that was I haven't read the full piece, but I didn't know that information. And it's very specific here to us and the energy industry in North Dakota and how it impacts other states. So I think that's great, getting that word out to folks and allowing readers to educate themselves on it. Amy, I have read some of South Dakota Searchlight's longer. I'm trying to think of what the right term is. They have a multiple piece story that they've been running for a long time about children in the foster care system in South Dakota. That is excellent. And I'm guessing wouldn't get picked up if they didn't have something like your organization paying people to look into it. I was wondering, are there any, I don't know what the right word is, for longer term topics that you're looking at coming up for as like multi-part story investigations that we're maybe not seeing in other like types of news media outlets for North Dakota? Yeah,
I mean, today is day 2, so I don't have any that I can, say that are coming out soon. But it is something that we wanted to do. Okay. Established, looking into, more investigative pieces, longer term.
We're having some troubles with Amy's
story.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We have a little bit of trouble with Amy's connection. You blanked out a couple times there. I don't know if you want to answer that question again.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, no, well, as I was saying, we're still early in our launch stage here, and so we absolutely have a goal of doing investigative projects and longer term stories. So we will be adding that, but it's going to take us a little bit of time before we're quite at that stage.
Do you feel like are you going to have somebody at the Capitol full time? I mean, I think you're all based in Bismarck, but I mean, covering like the Capitol. I mean, that's something somebody's stationed there.
Yeah, so we have an office in downtown Bismarck. We're 4 minutes from the Capitol. So I think we're going to be kind of bouncing back and forth between our office and the Capitol. Right now, Mary Sawyer is at the budget section. So 3 of us are here in Bismarck, and we'll be able to easily go over to the Capitol for meetings. Jeff Beach is based in the Fargo area, and so he will be sometimes covering meetings remotely. Like he's going to be covering the redistricting meeting today, but he'll be remote. But we will have a photographer there, a freelance photographer there in person. So it'll be kind of a combination. And with the live streaming capabilities, it does give us a little bit more flexibility to multitask and tune in on a meeting, even if we can't be there in person.
I'll tell you, that's one of the beautiful things about this era. I mean, I remember when we first got live video coverage of the legislature, and what a revelation that was. And then we got it in the committee hearing room, which was great for me because I don't like going to Bismarck or the Capitol. I've always kind of worked remotely.
You heard here, folks.
Yeah. Well, hey, I've always worked remotely. I don't know. It works for me. When I first got into this stuff, I had a day job and I couldn't go to Bismarck. I had to work. So I relied on everything, just the phone, making phone calls and everything else. So that's where I got started. Being able to cover this stuff remotely has been wonderful. You've mentioned like news and commentary too. How's the commentary work? Like, is that like, I guess just like editorials like you would see in a newspaper?
Yeah, and that's a section that we're still going to be developing. We have some guidelines for submitting commentary that are on our website. And so I'll still be kind of developing that and working with contributors on submitting commentary. And at times it will be written by me as well.
How spicy or partisan could it get? Meaning, like, could Sandy Sanford or Adam Goldwyn, the chairs of the Republican and Democratic parties in North Dakota, submit editorials to you that you would run?
Well, the goal of States Newsroom is really to avoid running editorials from people who are already in office or already affiliated with the party. We're going to be looking for voices that maybe aren't already being heard. And so we had a great column from Megan Langley of Strength and ND that we ran this week and I had reached out to her because I think she brings the perspective of the rural communities that we don't always hear. And so that's the kind of thing that we're probably going to be looking for.
How much input do you get? I know you said that you had, you're making some of this stuff locally, but making, some of these decisions locally, but then, how much input do you get nationally? I mean, can they step in and say, listen, we don't really like this series of stories. This isn't really what our organization's about. Do they have that kind of supervisory, or how independent are you locally?
So I do report to an editor, and she's in New Mexico. She had launched the Source New Mexico, but now she's a national editor. And so she's really there more to support me rather than direct me. So she did provide some editing on our launch day to make sure, everything looked good, but all of her edits were suggestions. Ultimately, I decided whether to take those edits or not. And so the control really is with the individual states.
Looking at the website here, there is a lot of content just on the front page, which surely was intentional for your launch day because you wanted to have a lot of stuff for folks to read. I get that. What's kind of the cadence here? Are you ever going to publish something in print? I've signed up for the newsletter now. I assume that comes out once a day, but what's kind of the rhythms that you're going for?
Yeah, we won't have 12 stories every day like we did on Tuesday. Like that was a lot, and that was to fill out the website. But we will be publishing content daily. We do have a daily newsletter, and as far as our pieces appearing in print, all of our work can be republished by other media outlets, and we're hoping that they do. And so I do hope that you'll see some stories in your local paper. That are reprinted from us.
Do you feel like, getting back to, and this is, I guess it's not all that different, because the States Newsroom, everybody who's donated over $1,000, they're listed on the website. You can go look at that. Much the same way I perform communications, I can look at the people who are advertising on our site and make a pretty good guess about, where the money, even though I'm not involved in that at all. I don't know how much those ads cost. I don't really know anything about that part of the business. I just write the stuff and nobody tells me anything about it. And that's the way it should be. But one thing about being a nonprofit, and it kind of seems like a double-edged sword, because on one hand, it's like, oh, it's a dark money group. They don't disclose their donors. And then it's like, well, here's a list of our donors. Oh, now all their journalists can see who the donors are, and they know who to avoid. So how do you navigate that? Like, how do you, if you came across a story that intersected with somebody who'd given, or an organization that had given significant amounts of money to States Newsroom, how does that get handled?
I probably wouldn't be aware of it, unless I went and looked at that website, and it's not something I'm going to really be looking at. And again, I get back to what I said earlier about the full page ads from Summit Carbon Solutions. Like that's always been kind of part of my job is, I've been working somewhere that was supported by somebody else, and it's never influenced my editorial decisions, and so I don't really see that any different with donors versus advertisers.
Are you looking for people to reach out with either editorials or suggestions for news stories? Is that something you're receptive to? Is that something is there like a preferred format for that to try and get like better, not maybe so necessarily bad faith takes or someone trying to either, discourage someone else, but an actual story that you want to follow up on?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. The best way to reach us would be info@NorthDakotaMonitor.com. And we absolutely would love to get some tips.
Well, that's the website, NorthDakotaMonitor.com. If you want to go check it out, they just launched Tuesday? Was it yesterday that you launched?
Yep, Tuesday. Yep.
All right. And I see I'm already mentioned in an article. I'll just clicking through here. It says about the new Republican executive director. There's Rob Port reported on.
Yeah. Well, we linked to your reporting already.
Yeah. All right. Well. All right. Well, that's the website, and I'm going to be subscribing. I read just about every newspaper that I can get my hands on in the state. Every day, or I try to. So this is going to be a new one that I'm watching. And Amy, good luck with it.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to visit with you.
Hi there. My name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
Welcome back. I do think it's a good, listen, any source of information is going to have a bias. I think sometimes we get wrapped around the axle about this idea of purely objective journalism, and I'm here to tell you it doesn't exist. Every news organization has an editorial stance, whether it's, and they have things that influence them. Traditional media a lot of times is very much influenced by the interests of the community it resides in. They're responsive to advertisers. They're responsive to criticism for readers. Publishers can be politically active and have a point of view. Editorial boards have point of views. It's all a matter of, I think what you want to do is you want to try to be fair. And And hopefully that's what you can do. But every news article is a collection of opinions. Somebody has to decide what the headline is. Somebody has to decide whether the article is news or not in the first place. These are all opinions.
I'd strongly suggest anyone who's interested in North Dakota politics and news, and hey, if you're listening to this show, I'm really guessing you are, hop on the North Dakota Monitor, just Google North Dakota Monitor, and they have a subscribe button at the top. And this, I was going to say, it sounds like me shilling for them. It is me shilling for them. It's me personally saying, I think if you're interested in North Dakota news, I'd sign up for the newsletter, because the bias that I shouldn't say bias. That was a terrible introduction. The aspect I like about this is that it is covering North Dakota specific in the weeds news that otherwise might not get attention. And not disparaging Amy or any of the folks there, I don't think they'll get everything right every time simply because they're human. But what this allows to them to do, and for folks in those industries to do, is to reach out to them and correct the story and educate the public on stuff that's going on specific to North Dakota industries, North Dakota state government. And that was something that when I was in the legislature, and even with groups that are trying to push for legislation or public policies of one form or another, and that can be left, right, or other, it is so hard sometimes to get attention on those issues. You've done a great job trying to bring as much attention to them as humanly possible. But this article she was referencing about the Supreme Court to hear a pipeline survey access case, that's not going to get covered by CNN. That's not going to get covered for, folks who are getting their news via Facebook. It's not going to get covered there. That's an in the weeds sort of thing that you can only get if you have someone who's a paid journalist who can look through those things and separate the wheat from the chaff.
Although part of the struggle is not, I think sometimes it's not a supply problem, it's a demand problem. The public should be interested in stories like that. I think a lot of their problem is that the public is not interested in stories like that, and it's probably not going to matter how many news organizations report them. You're not going to create demand where none exists. I think that's not me being criticism of being critical of them. That's me being more critical of society about spending a lot of time caring about things that don't matter and not a lot of time caring about things that do.
I hear what you're saying there, and I don't know quite how to square it. I obviously talk to political people, and I talk to folks who are more involved. So my personal experience.
That's part of the problem. Is you and I are not normal consumer. We're not Joe Sixpack consumer of the news. We are very politically active, very very policy interested people, and we are not the norm by any stretch of the imagination. Nor would I argue most of the audience for this podcast are not the norm for this sort of thing.
But I think there is a, if it is niche, there is a demand, or there's a want for it somewhere, even if it's not as big as a want as the, frankly, the sports section in any local newspaper.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. The one thing that does give me pause is some of the criticism from NewsGuard, where they were talking, and I read this to her and I didn't, but there was concern like in other states where this organization that has unquestionably, like you look at their list of donors, it's not really bipartisan or bi-ideological, whatever you want to call it. It's very much from the left where the money's coming from. And some of the things they've talked about is that they, the subsidiaries of this network in other states have done like soft focus, soft focus pieces about Democratic candidates or Democratic politicians, and then used Facebook ads to like promote those. And they were, NewsGuard was being pretty critical of this. NewsGuard itself is a nonprofit organization that rates news, that rates like the fairness or the balance or what have you of news organizations like Forum Communications. By the way, we have a perfect score from NewsGuard.
Now I see why you brought it up. No, just kidding. I will cop to the fact that when you were reading that quote to Amy, I wasn't 100% following you. Sure. I thought I got the gist of what you're saying. So
and that's part of my fault. I had it out and I had like the wrong part underlined. But essentially, what's happened is like in other states, it has kind of seemed like the organization worked a little bit hand in hand with Democrats. Now maybe that's because whoever was running it in that other state was I don't know. I don't know, but I will tell you that when you have this much money from sort of one side of the ideological spectrum going to a group, it's hard for me to believe that there's not an ideological bent to what they're trying to do. Like, that doesn't just happen by accident.
Sure. And I don't have any background with this group nationally, with the exception of I am a consumer and a daily newsletter subscriber of South Dakota Searchlight, their equivalent in South Dakota. And like I was referencing, one of the main things they have been reporting on for their long-term investigation. I need to come up with a better name than long-term investigations.
Long form journalism.
They did a multiple-part story on children in the foster care system in South Dakota. And I mean, that I would think now, if you work in the foster care system there, maybe you think it's accurate, maybe you don't. But I would say that as a focus is kind of what Amy's talking about. That's the sort of thing that might not get more than 3 or 4 paragraphs in a regular daily newspaper that is allowed to then take a deep dive into a specific issue that's impacting a large population, but maybe doesn't generate headlines. I think that's a great thing for North Dakota if that's what they're intending on doing here. I guess, like I said, I only have that exposure to their group, and they definitely report on things that like the South Dakota federal delegation does, but it's things like I'm looking at here, like South Dakota's Johnson, aka Congressman Dusty Johnson, votes yes as House sanctions New York member for pulling fire alarm. Well, that's something that Dusty Johnson did, and then they give the details of why he did that with a quote from
Although
him.
that's not exactly. I mean, I imagine that story was probably published everywhere else. I mean, that we published the same about Kelly Armstrong. So I don't know. Listen, I'm going to judge their work based on their work. Jeff Beach was my editor when he worked for the Forum for a brief moment in time. He was my editor. I mean, he was the guy I filed my stories with. So, I mean, I know, Amy Dalrymple's work. I think anybody who reads the news in North Dakota has been very familiar with her work, including when she worked for Forum Communications. These are local people. So, I'm going to judge the work by what it is. And we'll see what happens with it. So I will say that I am happy overall that there's going to be more people covering more things. And I hope that's really what they do, is branch out and maybe cover some of the meetings that, the Forum, I don't know if a lot of people notice this, back during the legislative session, the Forum and the Tribune were running one another's stories. And I thought was great. And one of the reasons why we did that is so that, because the thing is, if we're not using each other's stories, and there's like a really high profile committee hearing going on, both of our reporters are going to be in that room, right? Because we both want to cover it. We both want the story out of that room. But meanwhile, down the hall, there's another committee hearing that might not be as high profile, but that is still important as well. And we don't have a reporter in that room because our reporter's in the other room. So by working with the Tribune, we were able to split the reporters up and cover more ground. And then we both had access to all of the stories coming out of the Capitol. So I hope that's what they do, is don't just report the same thing everybody else is reporting. Get out there and report, cover some of these committee hearings that aren't being covered. That would be fantastic.
And as just a consumer who had no behind the scenes, access to decision making to share those stories, but as someone who's a total dork who wants to follow North Dakota politics, I really appreciate that formatting. I thought it led to that much better, that much faster reporting on what's going on. We were just
able to cover more ground. I mean, that's really it. I mean, we just covered more ground. So
one last bit about the North Dakota Monitor, because I really hadn't been on the front page until today. They republished a piece from, I'm going to butcher their name, but it's a Hadley Barndollar, New Hampshire, about a climate-focused conservative group that Doug Burgum sat down with and did an interview with in Manchester, New Hampshire. And the reason I bring that up is I'm a pretty avid North Dakota news consumer. I'm on Doug Burgum's campaign list for what was his presidential campaign. I read a lot about stories about Burgum. I had missed this and this group completely, no matter what you think of it. It doesn't matter one way or another.
Yeah.
But for someone who's an avid North Dakota and, because of North Dakota, therefore Doug Burgum news consumer, I had never heard of this. I had never heard of him sitting down for it. And that's an anecdotal bit, but great job on the North Dakota Monitor's part, highlighting something that I didn't know that's, again, directly relevant to our state with a governor who's running for president and a issue, in this case, climate and carbon capture, that is directly impacting our state on a pretty regular basis. So if it's things like that going forward, I'm really looking forward to having this organization around.
All right, let's talk. Speaking of getting down in the weeds, let's talk redistricting. To give the backstory in this 2021, our legislature held a special session to redistrict. That's the normal thing. They drew a new map. They created 2 sub-districts, District 9 and District 4. What I mean by sub-districts is each district elected 1 senator, but then the districts were divided in half, and each half elected 1 representative. So the district as a whole still had 1 senator and 2 representatives, but the representatives weren't voted on by the whole districts. Each represented half of the district. They did that in 2 districts, 9 and 4, because those were near tribal communities. District 4 near the Fort Berthold reservations, home of the 3 affiliated tribes, the MHA Nation. District 9 being near the Turtle Mountain Chippewa reservation. And it worked, by the way. The intent of creating those sub-districts was to empower Native American voters, and those 2 sub-districts in the last election in 2022 did each elect a female Native American voter. But the Spirit Lake and Turtle Mountain tribes, they wanted their own district, drawn a different way, and so they said that it didn't do enough to empower Native American voters. They put it before the federal courts under the Voting Rights Act, and federal judge Peter Welty struck down the map, and earlier this year, in fact last month in November, gave lawmakers until December 22nd to draw a new map. The state went back to Judge Welty and asked for more time, essentially. Yesterday, he decided not to give them more time. So as things stand right now, that December 22nd date, which by the way is 9 days from now, that still stands. And even less weekdays. And if the legislature doesn't get a new map in, then Judge Welty may very well just accept the map drawn by Native Americans. Now, I want to start out first and foremost, this entire process frustrates me. And let's give a couple of quick bits of context. Sure. Because even though this is a news-related audience, this is a little bit confusing too. This is entirely separate from the other special session that, yes, we did just have. Right. That was about it was about single issue items with the OMB budget and department budget. This is entirely separate. That was the state Supreme Court that ordered that session. That's been completed. Those issues have been resolved. I wonder if in state history we've had 2 special sessions scheduled this close to one another. If they hold another one, it'll be the second court-ordered special session this year. It is unusual. I will tell you. So what's happening now, though, is that although that December 22nd date still stands, it's now being appealed to the 8th Circuit. Now, just to make everything a little bit soupier, is the fact that the 8th Circuit, almost contemporaneous to Judge Welty's original ruling, they issued a ruling of their own, essentially narrowing the enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, saying that people bringing challenges under what's called Section 2 of the law, they can't be private entities. Essentially, the 8th Circuit said only the Attorney General of the United States has the authority to bring those challenges. Well, this challenge was brought by 2 Native American tribes. Do they have standing? I don't know. Essentially, that's what's happening right now is the state of North Dakota is appealing this to the 8th Circuit, which has already ruled that these sort of challenges, who can make them, has been narrowed. So is that December 22nd date going to stand? I don't think so, Ben, and nor should it. I don't understand the reticence to giving more time. The state of North Dakota has the right to appeal this. I don't know how you could say you have the right to appeal this, but also in appealing, if you go by the deadline I set, that I'm just going to throw out your map by default and accept this other map. Like, it seems like we're creating these no-win situations for ourselves where if we just slowed down and work through the arguments, we could hopefully find a way out of this that's acceptable to everybody. And for even further context with the time, so when we're talking about the 8th Circuit, we're talking about the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. That's the Dakotas, Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas. And I think, for some folks, they might wonder, why is there consternation about trying to get something done in a month? Why is the legislature being so slow? And it's worth noting for context there, they need quorum to even call themselves back in. And that involves getting a whole lot of people to Bismarck in what has
come the start of winter in North Dakota, when a lot of people have travel plans based around holidays towards the end of the year, not to mention they're trying to see their family on and so forth after they just had a special session.
Right.
And for even more behind the scenes, the interim committees, which usually are pretty much done meeting in December, have had a very, very busy schedule in Bismarck this month, and that is mostly due to being delayed because of state agencies having to push some of their budget reporting back because of the other special session.
Right.
So you have a lot of consternation here, and here's a familiar note that I play a lot, but I'll play it again here. If we didn't have every other year session, if we had every year session, they could go to a judge and say, hey, I know you want this done in December. We're about to gavel in first week of January. Let's just get it done then.
Right.
And I'm guessing most courts would shrug their shoulders and say, you know what, that makes a lot of sense.
I really don't understand why the court couldn't just shrug its shoulders anyway. And
I'm wondering if there's some election timing, because it's an election year next year.
Right.
2024. Is there some need timeline-wise to solidify a district line?
I mean that's a good point, because starting January 2nd, I know in the Republican Party, the local districts can start holding their conventions.
That's the same in the Democratic Party.
And so, who is going to be at that convention, who's allowed to participate in those conventions is going to be dictated by those lines, right? I mean, if the lines
those lines need to be in place in order to do that. Otherwise, you'd have a district convention that could just not count,
right.
And that gets messy.
If the lines move, a candidate who's in one district might not be in that district anymore. Now, I don't think they're going to move. I mean, whatever they do, they're not going to move across the state. There's going to be some specific areas, but I mean, it could potentially impact thousands and thousands of people. So, that is one argument for getting this done, but it really frustrates me. But first of all, I want to point out again that this is not a case. I know sometimes with these redistricting cases, it's pretty clear that whoever drew the maps was trying to marginalize a certain type of voter, whether it's along racial lines, ideological lines, what have you. That does happen. In North Dakota, this was a question of the legislature was trying to draw lines to better enhance Native American votes. And again, it worked. We elected 2 Native American women from these sub-districts, right? That was the goal, and it worked. And by the way, most of the Democrats in the legislature voted for this. The 2 Native American members of the legislature in 2021 at the time, Senator Richard Marcellet and State Representative Ruth Buffalo, they both voted for this. 3 affiliated tribes chairman Mark Fox praised the map, as did State Representative Ruth Buffalo. So this wasn't a thing where like racist lawmakers were trying to suppress Native American votes. It's more an argument of it didn't go far enough. And part of what bothers me too is if you read the opinion from Judge Welty, the analysis is, they look at, okay, Native Americans make up this percentage of North Dakota population, but they only make up this percentage of elected members of the legislature. Because the percentages don't match up, then there must be a problem with the map. That is the analysis being done, and it really bothers me because it doesn't take into account how many Native American candidates ran. How do North Dakota voters vote for Native American candidates if they're not on the ballot? And just because a Native American candidate doesn't win an election, is that evidence that the map was drawn poorly? Maybe the candidate wasn't a good candidate. I don't know.
I completely agree with you that every voter has a right to vote however they choose, and that they don't just have to, vote for them. And for instance, in the case that you're referencing there, Representative Ruth Buffalo actually represented Southwestern Fargo,
right,
in her district, in District 27. The only thing because I think it's maybe a bit of flawed analysis that, because there's a percentage here, therefore they'll get elected there, because it almost implies there's not a choice on the behalf of voters, and voters literally are making a choice.
So like
so it neglects that. I did want to say one other thing, because I don't know if I agree with your the categorizing of saying that they're saying it's not going far enough. Not that that's even inaccurate. I think what's being said by the people bringing this suit forward was that this was put forward for some tribes, but not for us. And they're trying to make it universal for them, which I think legally could make a lot of sense. And the folks who voted for it, and some of them have. Some of the folks who voted for these maps have said, I voted for it because I thought it was an improvement. That doesn't mean I don't think it could be better. Now, is the route always going to be a lawsuit or special session? I think that's going to become an inherent flaw pretty quickly.
Every legislative process have bills that people vote for that aren't perfect, but you vote for it because at least it's an improvement. I mean, I don't know that that's. I have a real problem with law. I mean, the whole reason we look down at gerrymandering is because you're not supposed to draw the district lines to produce a political outcome. But now we're to the point where we're trying to fight gerrymandering, which is, again, it's the drawing of lines because they don't produce a political outcome. We're trying to fight gerrymandering by drawing lines that produce a political outcome. I mean, if the goal here is just to elect more Native Americans to North Dakota's legislature, I feel like that is such, like you said, I think that's such a flat analysis. I mean, do we just care about the race of the people in the legislature? I don't. I'm happy to vote for a Native American candidate. But for instance, last cycle, there was a Native American on the statewide ballot for the Democratic Party that didn't even bother to file. I mean, she did nothing to campaign. She didn't even bother to file her campaign disclosures. I mean, she blew by multiple deadlines. She hardly did anything. I did not find that to be an inspiring candidate. Are all the people who declined to vote for her on the statewide ballot, is that a problem that she wasn't elected? Because there's no Native Americans in statewide office in North Dakota. She was running for those offices. Should we have elected her just because she's a Native American and because that would have created more balance in those offices? I think that's an absurd way to think of this. That particular example is, I would still say that those bringing the suit forward would not say that is their case. So I don't think that's an accurate. I don't think that's literally their case. They're literally saying that they want to elect more Native Americans. We need to draw the map so we elect more Native Americans. That's the whole case. That's the case.
Yeah, but their case is specific to legislative lines. You're talking about statewide office. That is different. That's a legitimate difference there, and it matters for the suit forward. I'm wondering, so if you're saying that they might have to accept the judge's lines if they can't get special session, and that's a lot of assumption going on because we don't know, and I don't know. I'm not saying I know one way or another. Are we simply going to have new district? How many more district lines would be created by that?
I don't know. Because the tribes had their own map, and I don't think their map had sub-districts, but I don't know what could happen. I mean, essentially, if that happens where the legislature doesn't submit a new map by the deadline and the courts don't grant them a reprieve, basically, and that's what the state's asking the Eighth Circuit for now, is to step in and give them more time. Essentially, you're going to have a map drawn by the judge, right? And he may well accept the one that was drawn by the tribes. He may, I know in other jurisdictions, the judge kind of just drew the map his or herself. So I don't know. And is that an improvement? I mean, a lot of this, listen, the law is the law and we have to follow the law now. And again, I look at this situation, I don't see there was any intent at all to marginalize Native Americans. I think the opposite is true. I think they were trying to empower Native Americans. They were trying to accomplish some of this. And I guess they just, in the eyes of the court, didn't go far enough. But I have a real problem with the Voting Rights Act and the jurisprudence around it. Like the way we're doing this stuff, I think is very, very problematic. My baseline for the House districts has always been make it universal. And I think it's a way better idea to have them split because we have right now universal sub-districts. That's what you're saying.
Universal sub-districts, because right now, frankly, the way the chambers are set up in North Dakota is mildly absurd. Everyone represents the exact same district, whether you're a House member or a Senate member. Everyone has the exact same number of years that they're in office. So at that point, what is the purpose of the two chambers? They're supposed to be a check and balance on each other, and that makes sense. There is one state, Nebraska, that famously has a unicameral legislature. I don't know if that's necessarily better. Could be. I've never studied Nebraska's government in depth, so I don't know. But to me, if you're going to have two different chambers, create a distinction there so that they can have some kind of differences.
I'd be okay with that. I didn't like that we did sub-districts and only two districts. I think you have to do them the same, one or the other. I don't
do it all.
Because I'm in District 5 in Minot, and I'm allowed, I can cast my vote for two House members, whereas if you live in District 4, you can only cast your vote for one House member. How is that? That doesn't make any sense. right? I mean, I have two members of the House that are counting on my vote, whereas District 4A, you only have one. I mean, in some ways, I could say I have more political representation than they do.
In a way, absolutely. And I think if you made it universal, not only would it be more fair, I could in Cass County point to both Republican and Democratic tickets that have members where one or usually two members are really doing the lion's share of the work there. Yeah. And that third member, if made to campaign for themselves, may or may not be more vulnerable. And you know what? That's actually a good thing, because that opens more incumbents to more competition. Yeah. And maybe the hardest working candidate would be more likely to win. That is inherently a good thing, even in primaries, which is becoming in North Dakota, unfortunately, the only competitive race in a lot of these districts. Let's make it a one-on-one race instead of this four-person free-for-all in the House.
One thing that I don't think, if we went to sub-districts across the state, I've seen Democrats say, oh, that would help. The North Dakota Republicans have super majorities because we don't have sub-districts, and I think that's a lot of hooey. I don't think that would change the partisan makeup of the legislature all that much. It'd be more like we'd probably change.
I don't think so.
We'd probably trade a couple of pieces here and there, but overall, I do think if we're going to do sub-districts, we should either do them everywhere or not at all. But I don't know. I mean, what's going to end with this map?
I'd like to do them everywhere, but that's Ben's opinion, and that doesn't really have any sway in the court.
We'll find out how the courts are going to handle it, and who knows? I mean, it's essentially a roulette wheel. Congress needs to rewrite the Voting Rights Act so it's something more workable. So frankly, it's easier for states like North Dakota to understand what is it that's expected from us. We've got to rewrite the law, and I don't want judges drawing the maps. Nobody elects federal judges. They're political appointees. They have their offices for life. They're not really accountable to anybody. I don't want them drawing the maps.
I believe it's Iowa and Montana. I'm pretty sure it's Montana's got like a land board that does it, where they do it literally based on geography. And it's like, here's what topography wise we have for districts, deal with it. And everyone has to deal with it. It sounds great to me, because then no parties are in charge of it, not judges.
Maybe we could get artificial intelligence to do it. Who knows?
Oh, no.
Who knows? I don't know.
Oh, no.
I may have just opened up Pandora's box with that suggestion. Maybe that's a terrible idea. Real quick, the North Dakota Republican Party has a new executive director. We're going to talk about real quick, Drew Nyhus. The party went from September to this week without an executive director. And I got to tell you, in the background, there's a lot of work that the party needs to do to be organizing in the background. I mean, the election year starts in a couple of weeks. So
you've got district conventions coming up. So not having an executive director in place, which now they do, but if they didn't, that would have been potentially very bad.
Yeah.
Organization-wise.
So they did finally hire somebody. He's a veteran of Senator Hoeven's staff. He's a veteran of Senator Kramer's staff. I've spoken to him pretty extensively in the past. Pretty well liked, pretty well respected, and it seems like hopefully now some of the drama around that for the North Dakota Republican Party has been settled, although a lot of the other factionalism in that. And a real quick question to you, Ben, are North Dakota Democrats in a position to take advantage of some of the scandal and the faction and the infighting that's happening in the Republican Party this cycle?
I think, listen, North Dakota Democrats absolutely are on paper, no matter what the state of the Dem NPL would be, it would be up to individual candidates to make consistent and concise cases about these scandals, because you and I know about them, Rob, but the average voter in District, I'll go with Cass County because I know Cass County. I live in District 46, District 27, District 45. There are Republican incumbents in all those places that don't necessarily reflect the kind of scandals that have been happening or the kind of headlines. And there are some that definitely do. What it is going to take on the part of a Democrat to take advantage of that is going out, hitting doors early, and telling everyone in the district, listen, you might be a Democrat, you might be non-party, you might consider yourself nonpartisan, you might consider yourself to be a Republican that's sick of the Trumpy wing of the party. And if you're those things, here's why I want to appeal to you and get your vote. And they have to do it again and again and again for 6 months till November. That's the only way they're going to be able to take advantage of it. But you asked, is that possible? Absolutely, it's possible.
It's possible. I guess the more question is, will it happen? And I mean, let's be honest. The Republican Party's changed in a lot of ways. It's not the Republican Party of 5-10 years ago. And there may be a lot of Republican voters out there.
I saw growing up that was the John Hoeven party.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Republican voters out there who may need to be introduced to that reality, or maybe just coming to grips with that reality, who may be open to voting for somebody different, but Democrats have to give them that person. All right, we're going to stop the show there. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.